friends, I would like to present HQMCNE point of view on hybrid threats in dedicated AOO. And just to clarification, our AOO is covering the Baltic states and Poland. I will mention specifically issues related to cyber, minorities, energy dependency, and current migration crisis on Belarusian and EU border. Unfortunately, I will not be able to present the conclusion drawn from the exercise using the hybrid scenarios because we are just prior to the Steadfast Jupiter 21 combat readiness evaluation exercise, but at least I will try to indicate hybrid threats related areas which are normally included to the mail list for the exercises. And finally, please note that due to the classification of the presentation, some aspects will be presented in a very limited way. Next slide, please. Before I will move to the main topic of my presentation, which is MNCNE perspective on the hybrid, I would like to briefly mention the MNCNE mission, which will allow you to better understand its role and responsibilities in the region. I would also like to introduce J9 analysis element, which is something unique in the NATO force structure. Next slide. So firstly, a few words on our roles and assigned tasks. We are NATO Regional Land Component Command, and I would like to stress the word regional. The hub to integrate all land operation in the region, and we are also a war-fighting core HQ, able to command subordinated formation in the battle. On a daily basis, HQMCNE acts as NATO's forward headquarters, delivering a comprehensive picture of what's ongoing in the Baltic Sea region, coordinating training and exercise and conducting advanced planning encompasses synchronization of NATO and national plans. It remains critical that we can fulfill this task seamlessly from our current sitting, from BACO up to crisis and eventually crisis. We are one of the 9 high readiness land forces HQs at corps level, but HQMCNE has different characteristics compared to the 8 other HRF HQs as depicted on the slide. Next slide, please. And a little bit self-promotion. One of the sections of the HQMCNE is J9 analysis element, established just a few months ago with the task to deep analysis of situation in order to better understand civilian environment in dedicated AO and AOA, and inform commander about the potential risk related to freedom of movement or freedom of action. Next slide, please. Okay, so I don't want to bore you anymore, and knowing the location and unique task of my HQ, let's move on the hybrid threats in the region. Based on the well-known model of hybrid activities, I've prepared an outlook describing the situation in the region from a regional RLCC perspective. I believe no one is surprised to hear that the main actors in the region are Russia and Belarus, 2 countries with a full range of tools prepared for use in the domain of hybrid war. From MNCNE regional point of view, potential targets are NATO and EU countries. However, the interest of J9 is focused on the Baltic states and Poland, specifically on the political, economic, social, and resilience domains. If we try to analyze hybrid activity in the region, it is easy to notice that Kremlin's impact on Russian-speaking minorities in the Baltic countries, cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, or the triggering of different crises, for example, the migration crisis last time. When browsing through various studies, one can often come across some speculation whether a hybrid threat exists and whether it is imagined. It is easy to reach the view that the threat is caused artificially by some politicians trying to hide their incompetence and neglect in various areas. What do you think? Is it true? Obviously not. Let's look at the matter from a historical perspective. Next slide, please. The Bronze Soldier crisis is recognized as an early stage of the hybrid conflict. In 2007, riots broke out in Tallinn related to the decision of the authorities to remove the monument of the Thanksgiving. For 2 nights, from 26 to 28 of April, the Estonian capital was shaken by powerful riots driven by pro-Russian extremist group called Night Watch, having direct ties to the FSB. Russian-language news channels all the time conducted media campaigns aimed at the Russian minority in Estonia, encouraging even the defense of the monument. But what is the most important, while Estonian Russian fought the police on the streets, the Estonian internet became the electronic battleground. Next slide, please. On April 27, late evening, the government service began to be bombarded by the so-called denial of services attacks. Today, it's known that these cyber attacks carried out by many hackers were started by the Russian organization Nazi, subordinated to the Kremlin. For the Estonians, cyber attacks were frustrating rather than dangerous. Also, their scope also caused financial damages. Hackers used quite primitive methods that would not be enough to destroy the IT infrastructure of Estonian society. However, the psychological effect remained. The suspension of banking services, even for a while, was enough to alarm the average citizen. Another proven example of Russian cyber attacks may be successful attempts to hack the Ukrainian energy network. The first in December 2015, resulting in power outage for roughly 230,000 consumers. The attack took place during an ongoing conflict in Ukraine and is attributed to a Russian advanced persistent threat group known as Sandworm. The second power cut that hit part of the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, in December 2016 has been also judged as cyber attack by researchers investigating the incident. The cybersecurity company, Information System Security Partners, has linked the incident to a hack and blackout in 2015 very easily. The investigation of mentioned incidents indicate the complicity directly or indirectly of Russian security services. I will back to the energy network resilience later on based on the example of Braille. Next slide, please. In 2013, Valery Gerasimov presented the thesis of the so-called New Generation War. 1 year later, Crimea has become a test of the possibility of using a new form of combat, the hybridism and asymmetry of which has been combined with an intensive information campaign, cybercrime, and the action of special forces. Both the information campaign and military operation corresponded with the features characteristic of the new form of combat, in course of which the boundary between war and peace is blurring. The main area of battle has, as it were, moved from the physical field to the hearts and minds. Definitely, the Russian information campaign was a key element of the operation in Ukraine. The continuation of the hybrid activities observed today is the immigration crisis driven by the Belarusian regime. A bit more about the modus operandi. At the beginning of June, in response to the sanction imposed by the EU, Belarus activated the lock operation, which had been prepared by secret services a few years ago. It consists in bringing emigrants from the Middle East and Africa to the borders of Belarus with the EU countries. After paying the appropriate fee, and our estimate is between 8,000 to 14,000 euros, Iraqis, Syrians, Afghans, and citizens of African countries are transported by commercial flight to Minsk and then assisted by secret services to the borders with Poland, Lithuania, or Latvia. They are then forced to cross the border in the small groups. However, this week, Polish border guards reported attempts to force the border by a large group consist of approximately 100 young men. The host nation were initially surprised by the waves of migrants, but very quickly took steps to overcome the crisis. Currently, there are many attempts to cross borders illegally every day, especially in the Polish-Belarusian section. Next slide, please. So multinational Core Northeast, as a regional security custodian, constantly monitors crisis on EU border with Belarus with the use of the cross-functional team led by J9. In accordance with our cross-functional assessment, it is likely that the governments of Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland will be able to deal with the current influx within the limit of the available means. Immigrants' number highly unlikely to impede mobility or stress mission-critical infrastructure for operation in the near to mid-term. It is also our assessment that it is currently unlikely that migrants' influx will lead to the political or social crisis in the affected countries. Next slide, please. Taking advantage of this opportunity, it's worth mentioning the NATO counter-hybrid team have been deployed to Lithuania. It was also mentioned by Sofia, but unfortunately all interesting information are classified, so I can't say it openly here during this webinar. Next slide. J9 tries to identify the risk of potential hybrid activities that potentially could affect resilience in our area of operation. BREL, Baltic States Energy Network, could be a good example of our activities in this matter. So Baltic States electricity grid is still operated in a synchronous mode with the Russian and Belarusian systems, commonly known as the BREL ring. The synchronization of the three Baltic States electricity grids with the continental European network is a key political priority aiming to ensure secure, affordable and sustainable energy for the Eastern Baltic Sea region. Current analysis showed that the dependency of the Baltic states on foreign electricity production is low. Last investments make the transmission corridors inside the Baltic states sufficient to sustain the electricity consumption under normal conditions, but the system can be easily destabilized by Russia or Belarus, for example, in the retaliation for Lithuanians' objections against Astravets nuclear power plant or other contentious issues. Next slide. Let's back to the MNC&E hybrid threat perception within AOO. As I said before, main actors are Russia and Belarus, targets are NATO, EU, and host nation. It is obvious that Baltic states and Poland are under persistent Russian and Belarusian hybrid activities with the aim of destabilize political, economic, and social system. Good example, the aforementioned migration crisis. Next slide. However, HKMSE activities are limited to monitoring of hybrid threats conducted in a cross-functional manner. Once again, it is almost certain that the Baltic states and Poland are under persistent Russian and Belarusian hybrid activities with the aim of causing destabilizing first, second, and third order effects. Overall aim of hybrid threats is likely geared towards undermining NATO and host nation credibility. We notice increase of hybrid threat manifested through opportunistic misinformation or disinformation and many attempts of cyber attacks. J9 currently focuses on the migration crisis on Baltic states and Polish, including monitoring of the situation at Belarusian-Ukrainian and Ukrainian-Polish borders, as well as the potential increase in the influx of Afghan refugees. Next slide. And at the end, just a few words about the hybrid in the exercise. So hybrid incidents are becoming more and more included in the exercise planning and execution. A good example is exercise Steadfast Jupiter, which will start in a few days. The exercise scenario begins in a deterrence phase before conventional kinetic hostilities. In this phase, a good portion of the injects will be related to the incident affecting the safe and secure environment in host nation and degradation of host nation resilience. Some of the areas are mentioned on the slide. Hybrid incidents in exercise has potential for a number of challenges. In order for the hybrid injects to function and be comprehensive, a higher involvement of host nation are requested than in typical kinetic injects, due to the fact that the host nation typically will be in charge in relation to countering hybrid incidents supported potentially by NATO. As a consequence, host nations are requested not only to take part in the exercise, but as well in the planning, including the man-made scripting. Host nation participation in the exercise has to be more comprehensive in order to provide consolidated feedback with input from more of the national services involved in the countering hybrid incidents. As host nations typically are in charge in countering hybrid incidents, at least in BECO and crisis deterrence, host nations might easily have complaints related to this, but typically they will be national secret and therefore can be an obstacle in relation to a NATO-led exercise. In deterrence, there will be issues in relation to authority by a NATO force to support host nation, which needs to be covered in the exercise planning by MOU or letter of authorities from higher HQ. This concludes my short presentation from the tactical perspective. I'm really interested in your question and ready to answer it during our panel discussion. Thank you.